Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast. I'm your host, Chris Harbert, and we have with us Andrew Knight, the Automation Panda. I'm really excited about this one. Andy and I met, at this point, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, if not before then. Was it 5 years ago?
I think it was 5 years. I think it was 2018.
Wow. Yeah. And, so at the time, Testery was still a very new concept, and Andy was not traveling the world as a keynote speaker at all of these conferences. And so it's been really cool to see his rise in the QA space and everything he's been able to accomplish during this time. So really excited to have him as a guest. Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast, Andy.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here.
How did you end up becoming a figure in our testing community where you're doing workshops and opening keynote speaker at some of the best conferences? How did that come about from where you were in testing before?
Humble beginnings for sure. It really started because I felt like I had something worth saying. When I graduated college, I thought I was just going to be some rank and file developer because that's what most computer science and software engineering programs in the United States produce. They produce candidates who know a little bit of coding. They send them off into the workforce, and it's like, you're going to do more code, and that's what everybody thinks. But I graduated shortly after the Great Recession. Jobs are hard to find, and the job that I was able to find was QA oriented. So I'm like, okay, well, I get to program because I'm doing automation. I'm cool with that. It doesn't matter what I'm coding. I just want fingers to keyboard is fun. I had originally gone to IBM, spent about a year there. Then I went to NetApp and spent 4 years there. NetApp, I was on a platform QA team, and there's low level kind of features like operating system, BIOS, that kind of stuff. And they wanted to automate tests for all those kinds of things. And the automated tests they had were just absolutely terrible. like shockingly bad. I remember my first project, my boss said, get these tests. They're currently running overnight in India's lab. Get them running here in North Carolina's lab. And I think this will be easy because they're already running, right? No, we were being lied to. And I had to have a crucial conversation after a couple of weeks to say, like, these don't work. Right. But it was in that time for me at NetApp that was very formative for figuring out how to do test automation the right way. We didn't have TAU. We didn't really have a thriving conference scene or meetups or anything. This was like 2011-ish. Maybe there was stuff out there.
For those who don't know, TAU is the Test Automation University, right?
Yes. Thank you. Good call out. So it was, and all of NetApp's test automation was in-house proprietary. They weren't using open source frameworks or anything. And it was all in Perl, which is a whole nother story. So I had
Perl.
to...
That's an interesting choice for a testing framework.
Well, I think the reason was, NetApp, they did all their operating system development in C. And then in like the 1000 somewhere, there was somebody in NetApp who's like, well, let's start doing this test automation thing. And I don't want to do it in C. Well, Perl's a higher level language. Let's just do it in Perl. And then everybody started replicating what that dude or lady was doing. And then here we are, like millions of lines of test automation in Perl later. Ta-da! That was my theory. Anyway, the point being, I had to figure things out the hard way. And I had to figure them out on my own through trial and error, through a true practice of engineering it. Like you try something, you see what works for a while, you iterate, you come back and you make it better. And I mean, my first tests that I automated were trash. They were better than what was there before, but they weren't that great. And when they started, popping off with flakiness and failing and not giving me the results I needed, I realized, oh, well, that's a problem, right? So going through that iterative process at NetApp is really what became the basis of my understanding of testing and automation, and having to hone that to be really, really good because like I'm not doing a halfway job of this. And so,
so I've asked a lot of people how they got started in test automation, and I always find it to be really interesting that very few, I don't think actually anyone has told me so far, I went to school and I wanted to get into test automation. It's always, I was already there. I was a developer and nobody was doing it. Or I was in some other role. Sometimes folks come from product management or other sides, but it's really interesting to me how we don't intentionally go into this path. But once we get there, some of us really learn to appreciate the complexities and nuance and difficulty of getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
So in your journey, when did you really start to appreciate that this, wasn't just clicking on buttons and wasn't just wiring up form fields to database backends, but a real engineering challenge and one that was interesting for you to
Mm-hmm.
solve and to continue to develop your skills around?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any like single moment. It was more of having gone through that iterative process over years and then having some sense that, I feel like I do have an expertise here that other people don't have. And that was kind of
Mhm.
the slow understanding. It took a while to kind of resolve in my mind, because I realized that other people didn't know the things I knew. Right? It's
Mhm.
like, oh, well, of course you would want to put protections around the sets. You want to have a little bit of a wait time in there. What do you mean? Like, well, otherwise it's going to flake out. you know,
Mhm.
or of course you want to have some sort of report analysis to kind of pinpoint the failure, so you're not scanning through all these pages of log. Huh?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, these things might seem obvious to us now, but like at least in my little bubble at the time, I was the guy who understood that when others didn't as much. And so it wasn't like I was guarding secret knowledge. It was like, of course, you teach
Mhm.
people, you help people, and all that. Um, when it really hit home for me was a little bit after NetApp. I left NetApp in 2015. I went to a little company called MaxPoint. It was a startup. This was the smallest company I worked for at the time. It had about 300 to 350 people. I
Mhm.
was originally hired to be on their test automation or on their QA team to be the test automation lead. I was like, yeah, being recognized. It wasn't like a senior level role or anything, but it was like, it was going to be a step up in recognition from where I was at NetApp. And I remember day 2 on the job, they swizzled. They quote unquote went agile. Yeah. So I got assigned to a
Day
Scrum
two,
team.
was that
Yeah,
new for them?
yeah. It's like you couldn't tell me by ahead of time. But
Yeah.
the impact of that was for about half a year, I ended up doing nothing but manual esque testing on a Scrum team because it was, well, these tickets are coming in. It's your job to test them. It's like,
Mhm.
not what it was supposed to be. Then I got a job. Then I moved teams to their QA tools and frameworks team that I hadn't even known about. I found out in like an all hands was there. So like 3 dudes at the time. And so I joined them and I find out that even though their name is QA frameworks, what they're actually doing is Jenkins management and Atlassian management. And I'm
Mhm.
like, hmm. So then I come in, I start trying to do more of the QA test automation side of things. And then about a little more than a half year after that, a company had a layoff and they decided to cut everybody with quality in their title.
Mhm.
Just because. I mean, the justification was, well, we're fully agile now. We're integrating teams. We're not having separate roles. The
Mhm.
real read between their lines reason, we're short on money. We need an easy way to cut people. But for some reason, they kept me. I'm like, but well, my title was like quality engineer. And they're like, yes, but you're into automation. Therefore, you're a developer. So what we're
Mhm.
going to do, Andy, is we're going to turn you into a C#.NET web developer. And I was like, is that what I want?
Mhm.
Is that really what I want to do? I mean, at that point, I had done a little bit of C#, and I thought to myself, it's like, well, if I ever wanted to become more of like a quote unquote regular developer, this would be that pivot. This could be that pivot point in my career where it'll be easy to transition because I'm not being pigeonholed as a tester. I'm going to have the support I need to migrate into that kind of role. But then I realized, like, wait a minute, I've spent at that point 6 years plus, if you consider my internships, honing my testing and automation skills to the point where I was like, I could probably be senior level automation engineer at this point. Whereas if I'm going into the C# web developerness, this is going to be very new to me. I'm essentially resetting everything I've ever done. And so I had to make a
Mhm.
bet on myself of like, do I really believe in my knowledge base? Do I really believe that I have some understanding and even wisdom here that is distinct, that is unique, and that is valuable?
Mhm.
And I said, I think I do. And so within
Yeah.
about a month or two, I left MaxPoint and I landed my first senior level engineering job at LexisNexis as senior. software engineer and test, or I think they called it senior test engineer at that time.
Yeah, so what I love about that is I feel like that's the essence of why the Developers Who Test podcast exists. You know, there are a lot of test automation engineers who are really good at solving the test automation problem who are getting encouraged to become developers because people don't understand the value of
Mm,
QA, or they have trouble from an organizational perspective viewing it as anything
mhm,
other than an expense. While
mhm,
at the same time, a lot of developers are being thrown this new testing responsibility with very little guidance, and they're
mhm,
just saying, hey, we're agile now, or whatever the justification is. Now developers own this big huge problem, and
mhm.
I think if nothing else comes out of this podcast, one of the things we'd like to help convey to folks is how much of a challenging engineering problem doing software testing is while
Yes.
still being valuable. So, I mean, if you look at the industry, I think last time I looked, it was something like $1.4 trillion being spent globally on QA, with roughly a third going to tools, a third going to people, and a third going to infrastructure, right?
Wow.
So this is bigger than the GDP of Australia, is what companies are spending on software testing, right? But at the same time, if you go to so many of these organizations, they feel like they're not getting the results that they would expect. And
Mm,
I think part of that is comes down to the fact that it is a complex engineering problem, and we're not encouraging developers to be better testers, and we're not encouraging testers to be better
mm,
developers. And neither model really works, right? So if you have purely independent developers and you have purely independent testers, and they're just throwing things back and forth over the fence, it's highly
mhm.
inefficient. And you have these specialists who, uh, a perfect example is the test automation engineer finds a bug that's just an issue with the copy or the layout.
Ugh.
That bug could be fixed literally in less than 1 minute if they just checked out the code and made the change and fixed it.
Mm.
But instead, we spend, 5 minutes creating a bug report, maybe 3 days debating whether or not we want to prioritize it. We loop in all of these other people, right? And it really
Mhm,
could have been fixed if we just had more of a generalist mindset. But the other side of that is this, I think, myth that we can create a single developer who is capable of doing anything.
mm,
And it's that generalist who knows, the ins and outs of Ember.js and how to wire up, two-way bindings on a web form, but at the same time knows Spring Boot and can make APIs. And oh, by the way, they're experts in Postgres and they know everything they need to know about sharding and how to migrate data in and out. And oh, at the same time, they need to know what is an element not clickable at point exception coming out of Selenium really mean, right? And
Yep.
there's just like so much we're throwing at developers. And maybe a senior developer can get there eventually. Like I feel like I knew kind of what I was talking about there, maybe a little bit, but I've been doing this 20 years, right?
Yep.
Imagine you're fresh out of college. This is your first
No.
programming gig, and you're getting hit with this. I want you to be a full stack everything because I'm too lazy to figure out how to train people to be specialists or how to plan across teams. There's something that doesn't work well in that, I think. And so
Mhm,
I do want to encourage developers to be better testers and testers to be better developers. But at the same time, I think we need to understand that there's a lot of value in having people who are specialists but can also enable. So kind of a
mhm,
long setup, but I guess the question is, if you're an SDET in an organization,
mhm.
how can you see beyond that siloed role to add more value to your organization so you can start becoming more of a hero within your organization
Mhm.
instead of being seen as I'm just an expense that is a necessary evil of shipping software?
Sure, sure. That's a great question. The way I like to think about it is that, particularly for the SDET role, or software development engineer and tester, software engineer and test, is that they need to not catch the fish, but teach the people how to fish. Common analogy. I like to see SDETs as more of these special ops forces within an organization, where it's not so much that they are assigned to any particular development team as, say, a regular tester or even an automation engineer might be, but that they're more like a shared resource of a team, in that their job is to empower people to do better testing and automation. Their job is to set up the systems and the frameworks and the tools that others will be using. How this can work is that when we look specifically at test automation, right? It's not just writing a bunch of test scripts. That's not what test automation is. It is you're building software projects to test other software products. And oftentimes you want to be doing this testing at scale. You want to get as much coverage in as short of time as possible so that you can deliver fast feedback. And so the SDET is there not necessarily to write a bunch of test scripts. The SDET is there first and foremost to help build fast feedback loops by whatever mechanism that might be. And typically the mechanism we look at is running automated tests in continuous integration systems, right? There's the view that the continuous integration system for an organization is the production environment for test automation, right? And when you start to view it in that way, then it becomes a more serious type of thing when you deploy your tests to CI. Like, oh, right? Because now you're going to put in the same level of care and attention and practice and patterns that you would for any other production environments, right? So your tests have to be good. And so if you're going to do that, that means you need controls around this. That means you need discipline around this. And you're going to need champions to help other people see it in this way, right? And that's primarily where I see the SDET really coming in and adding value across an organization, right?
Yeah, I think that idea of productionizing your testing is huge. You know, that's a large way that the Testery platform came about. Was I was looking at, you know, we've got all of these dev systems that are really production systems who are testing development. You know, what can we do to treat this more like a production system? And, you know, taking that mindset eventually turned it into a platform that runs automated tests. You know, that has logging and monitoring and alerting and analytics and all that stuff. But
there's
I think
a lot of complexity there.
Yeah. And I think anyone, you know, not everyone's going to run off and build their own test automation platform that runs in the cloud. But I think every SDET in an organization has an opportunity to find those things that they don't like about how testing is running and take ownership of those things and take actions to improve those things. And I think really that's what makes SDETs start to become heroes in their organization. So reminds me of a good story I've got here. You know, the startup I was at previously, they had one of those rewards programs where it's like an employee can rate other employees and give them stars, and if you get enough stars, it's kind of a big deal, right? And you know, one of the things I was thinking is, you know, you very rarely see the back end employees, like people working on APIs or people working on QA, get recognized at company events for helping to contribute to others. And, you know, I was thinking, well, why is that? And one of the reasons was because testers were just sitting there finding bugs. We weren't working together with developers to make their lives easier to fix bugs. So I love that you brought up the enablement piece, because when we took on that mindset of, you know, we're not competing against developers, we're collaborating with them. And we're trying to make their lives better. So why don't we just say, hey, I found this bug in your code. Here's the fix for it. Can you give me a peer review on this so that we can get it merged? Now all of a sudden the developer is like, holy cow, this is the best QA person I've ever worked with. And so folks on my team started doing that. And every quarter, folks on the QA team were being recognized at the company level for being helpful. And it was largely just because, we weren't just finding the bugs, we were helping to fix them. And I think that's just one really small example of how SDETs can be heroes in their organization. And I think now is probably the most critical time for that, with all the advances of AI, all the pressures for companies to ship faster. We need to be there to make sure that the quality still happens. And I think if we're going to be there to make sure the quality still happens, we need to be seen on the profit or revenue side of the company and not the expense side of the company. So
I resonate with that. And if I can extend what you were saying there, I think being in a testing or QA or QE or SDET kind of role makes it easier to add that kind of unique value, to be a little bit more free to think outside the box and do those kinds of things. What I found in a lot of teams is that developers tend to have to be rather narrowly focused on what they're doing, right? They get their tasks, they have to code up this thing, they push it out, and that's the next one, right? Whereas within the quality space, there's a bit more freedom, I found, in how to go about the job. And so for people who are willing to step up, like you said, there's more flexibility for that to happen. So I would encourage people in these kinds of roles to, yes, absolutely seize that opportunity, because you can add a lot more value than just, like you said, oh, I found a bug, throw it back.
What do you think is the main thing that is stopping people from being able to do that? Like, what are some challenges that, if you're an entry level QA person, you've been tasked with doing test automation, is there anything that really prevents you from moving into that more enablement role? Let's call it quality enablement.
Yeah, I've heard that term before.
Or should just everyone be doing it?
Well, I think there's a lot of barriers to that, unfortunately, when there shouldn't be. One of which is a skill barrier, I think, because historically what we've seen in the quality space is that not everybody is a bona fide developer as a tester. Not every tester should be, right? I mean, there are plenty of great testers out there who are manually driven, exploratory oriented testers. They don't know how to program. They're just really good at knowing products and systems, and that's okay. Right, they're not going to be checking out a GitHub repository and fixing it and sending a PR.
Can we just pause for a second and say that that's okay again?
And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. I've worked with phenomenal testers like that.
Yeah, I think with the push for automation, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that, especially those exploratory testers, are sometimes the most knowledgeable ones in the entire company about how the product actually works. With a close second probably being the customer support team. And probably at the bottom of the pile would be the sales team. They have no idea what the product does. Sorry, I can say that I'm in sales sometimes.
Well, I mean, I'll also throw developers under the bus and say they're probably right above the sales team, because I've also seen that just because you're building the thing doesn't mean you understand how it's supposed to work or the actual business value. That's shocking to me, but I've seen it and I've even lived it. So yeah.
It can be a huge disconnect. And honestly, if you take the is going off on a little bit of a tangent, but if you take the sales view of what a product does, the product view of what the product does, the development, you'll get some differences in terms of how they talk about it, what they think the capabilities are, how certain requirements are supposed to work. I think if there's one problem in an organization that an SDET can really contribute to, it's getting those four perspectives to be in more alignment. And that's something that you don't need to know how to write code to do, by the way. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, well, you've outlined four amigos, but typically it's called the three amigos.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I've heard the three amigos. Which three do you consider the three amigos?
the three amigos would be business development and test, those roles.
Business development and test. Okay.
Yeah.
So the fourth one we just threw in was sales.
Sales, yeah.
Yeah.
Are they an amigo or are they? No, I'm not gonna go there. It's all good.
They're too busy out crushing it and doing whatever they do to
So we
close
hope.
deals, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
Today's episode of the Developers Who Test podcast is brought to you by Testery.com. Whether you're a developer who has just a handful of tests or even thousands, then your tests deserve to be running on the fastest and most reliable platform for open source testing. With AI-driven insights and analytics, unparalleled parallelism, and awesome integrations, Testery enables you to get more from your tests. Check us out today at Testery.com. Circling back to the SDET piece,
Mhm.
I do think participating in the demos or even running the demos, for example, uh, it doesn't always have to be the developer who does the sprint demo. Maybe it could be
Mhm.
the quality person. I was a speaker at TestCon Europe maybe a month or two ago, and one of the presentations they made the recommendation of having someone uh, run the demo who hasn't actually participated in creating the code.
Ooh.
Uh, and I thought that was such an interesting concept because you're capturing not just does it do what it's supposed to do, but does a person who hasn't seen it before, uh, do they intuitively know what to do? Do they use it the same way?
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think that was a really interesting concept. I haven't incorporated it into any of my teams yet, but I do feel
Mm.
like there are implications there for quality and testing. So if we've
Mm.
got any developers who test out there who are interested in trying it out, I would love to hear, if you do this style of sprint demo, what kind of results that you get, and send us your feedback. I'd love to
Mm.
hear it. So you've obviously done really well. Being able to take this SDET experience, put a brand around it, get out there and talk about it. And that may feel intimidating, I think, for the newer developers to think like,
Mm.
okay, that seems like a whole lot. I guess if you were back in those shoes, would you recommend to somebody that they start, creating the blog, getting content out there? Has it been a rewarding experience for you? And is that something
Mm.
that people who are looking to, take their skills beyond the walls of their organization should embark in?
Mhm. Yes. The general answer, yes. Asterisk. Has
Hmm.
it been a rewarding experience for me? Overall, absolutely yes. I would not be where I am today without having blogged and taught and spoken and done all these kinds of things. But not everybody needs to do it to the same degree that I've done it. In fact, I don't think very many people within the industry have leaned in as hard as I have, especially the past 2 years. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, I'm going to be probably peeling back a little bit from the intensity because I'm no longer in a developer relations role, so I don't. It's not my main job to do these kinds of things. But getting to your other question, should other people, and especially more entry or mid-level people, should they consider doing some form of content creation? And I would say yes, and I would say yes at any level of engineering that they might
Mhm.
find themselves in, because what everyone will find if they are passionate about their career and about the the technical domain that they find themselves in, whether it's testing, some form of development, something else. Um, any motivated professional is going to cultivate a unique expertise, right? That
Mhm.
is formed by their experiences, that is formed by the work that they've done, that is formed by their interests. And it is unique because they're the only person who is ever going to go through exactly the journey that they're on. And so that they're going to have novel insights into things. They're going to see the world in a particular way that could be valuable to share to other people. And if they really pursue their craft, then they will likely also be developing new ideas, new processes. They might even implement new kinds of tools or patterns or something, right? And
Yeah,
that I believe.
how many of the tools and patterns that we leverage as an industry were side projects that passionate
Indeed.
people were just, hey,
Yeah.
I don't want to be the only company that's doing this, and
Yes.
I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to have some help and collaboration on this
Mm-hmm.
particular pattern. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I can open source this library. And now you look around and how much of the industry is running on open source.
Correct. Exactly. And
Yeah.
so it can be something where people might think, well, what I have learned is not necessarily valuable or that nobody's going to care. And I would say that's not true. Um, I would say it is very beneficial to turn that into some sort of shareable content, right? It could be as simple as writing a blog post a couple times a year, right? It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
much, right? It could be as simple as like doing some screen shares and popping it out on YouTube, or it could be going to meetups or conferences or other kinds of events, and not even necessarily speaking, though that could be one thing, but just being there and talking with other people and being in the community, right? You can be in tech, but not in tech communities, right?
Mhm.
To be intentional about being in community is enough of a step. It could be releasing an open source project, right? It could be as simple as working in public. Like I know so many people have little projects that they work on their machines. It's like, okay, well, what I do is every time I start a new project, no matter how simple, stupid it is, I create a GitHub repository, clone it, start adding my code to there, and push it back. So
Mhm.
I'm always working in public, as long as it's not like a proprietary company thing, of
Mhm.
course, right? Um,
I'm always so impressed by, and we'll have an upcoming guest. She hasn't committed yet, so we'll see. But uh, I'm always surprised at people who are willing to learn in public,
mm,
where they're actually like live streaming. Here I am trying out, GitHub Copilot for the first time.
hmm.
Watch me.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I feel like that takes an incredible amount of bravery, and
Yes,
a
it does.
willingness to fail and be wrong in public. But I think
Hmm.
that's what makes it so genuine. And
Correct.
um, I guess if there are folks in our space who are going to be looking to create content, uh, I think it's that being genuine is something that's so lacking in a lot of what's out there, and
Yep.
also, by the way, something that AI cannot auto generate
Hmm.
out of
Hmm.
necessity. So
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. So
Yeah.
it seems like, we've talked about a few ways the SDETs can become heroes. Participating more in collaborating with their teams, helping the product owners and business with demos or understanding new requirements as they're coming in, helping with bug fixes,
Hmm.
and really shifting into that enablement role.
Mm.
Um, what do you think happens to the SDETs that don't make an effort to try to be heroes in their organization?
Mm. Inertia happens. An object at rest stays at rest,
Yeah.
right? I mean, not everybody needs to be some superstar, rock star, hero, save the day kind of engineer. But I think every professional, and that includes engineers, should step up and do a good job, and not just a good job, but a great job,
Mm.
right? Adding value to an organization, helping other people, pushing the needle forward, making progress, delivering something better than what was before. And that can be done very loudly or can be done very quietly, but it should be done.
Mhm.
Right. Um, and so, like, if you have an SDET or some other kind of tester that isn't trying to push the envelope, unfortunately, what I have seen is that they can fall into obscurity And ultimately, that's on the chopping block for when layoffs come, right? Or it can create this sort of it can devolve the relationship between the roles of development and testing into an adversarial us versus them, right? Because like you said before, developers never see anything from the testers or the SDETs other than your thing broke, your thing broke, your thing broke. That's not a very healthy basis for a relationship, right? It becomes more combative than collaborative.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, imagine in your the personal relationships in your life, if there was that one person in your life where the only conversation they have with you is you did this wrong, you did that wrong, you did the other thing
Exactly.
wrong. Like nobody wants
Exactly.
to nobody wants that,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly. And so yeah,
Um,
it's very important, like we're saying, for people in the testing or the SDET or the automation role to be more intentional, perhaps
yeah.
than other roles need to be.
Yeah, so public service announcement. If you're a tester and you're testing a developer's code, try to find something they did right that's a
Mm.
really good design pattern or
Hmm.
really clever, and just tell them. Make a what should we call it? It's not a bug report. It's like a good thing report.
That works.
Yeah,
High five,
I don't know what to call
kudos.
that, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean,
Test.
I think, and this kind of goes back to the developers who test and testers who develop thing.
Hmm.
More and more, the skills are coming together of developers need to have a tester mindset and know how to test.
Yeah.
Testers need to have a certain amount of development skills, in particular, if you're doing functional or end to end testing. And so, since those are coming together, I think the main difference in the roles comes down now to personality and specialization. So
Mm.
there's the developers who are of the builder mindset, there's the testers who are of the breaker mindset, but they're all capable of doing both aspects of the job. And if a team doesn't have a healthy balance of both of those personalities, if you're only a bunch of builders, you're going to be out there cranking out really cool looking
Mm.
shiny things that don't work. If you're all a bunch of breakers, you're never going to ship anything. You're going to be
Yeah.
sitting there like trying to build the best thing you can possibly build. Meanwhile, your competitors are getting all the revenue.
Mm.
And so I think that's, I think that's an interesting aspect of it is we need to appreciate our personalities and what that brings to the
Mm.
table.
Yes.
While at the same time, as you mentioned, like developing your skills so that it's not like an unlevel playing field. Um, but yeah, I think that's a pretty cool way to run a team. So so we're getting close to the end of the episode here. Unfortunately, I feel like I could talk to Andrew Knight, the Automation Panda, for I don't know, days and days and days. But as
Mm.
we're wrapping to an end, just curious, what's coming up on your schedule for the next few months?
Sure.
Have anything exciting going on that we should keep an eye out for?
Oh, yes. So I had mentioned that I'm not going to be doing as much speaking or travel, but I will still be doing quite a bit. Um,
Hmm.
the events that I have confirmed for next year so far, I will be at Star East in Orlando in springtime. I will be giving tutorials there again. I will be at Pi Texas in Austin in April. I will be giving a Pi test tutorial there. And I will also be at QA or the Highway in June
Hmm.
in Columbus, Ohio. I will be speaking. Um, that will be
Awesome.
exciting. So there's probably going to be some other events that I do, a couple virtual things. I'm hoping to go back to Star West in October of next year. We'll see. Most likely that will be a yes. And if there are any, we're hoping to get TISCA, the Triangle Software Quality Association in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, trying to get an event next fall. And if we are
Hmm.
able to pull that off, I will definitely be there.
Awesome.
So yeah.
I love how your version of scaling it back for the rest of us is quite the schedule. So,
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah. But for anyone who's listening, I highly recommend going and listening to Andy speak if you ever get an opportunity, taking one of his tutorials or workshops. Really awesome person, has done a lot of work in our space, has some really cool open source projects that he's put out there for the rest of the world. So, go check those out and keep an eye on what he's up to. So, Andy, can't thank you enough for coming on the Developers Who Test podcast. We'll look forward to seeing what you've got going on in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you for the kind words.